It was a quiet afternoon as passengers shuffled through the airport, heading to their gates, none of them paying much attention to the man in the wrinkled suit, standing in line for the flight to London. He blended in with the crowd, just another face in a sea of travellers. But something about him seemed different, not in an obvious way, but in the subtle things, the way his hands trembled slightly as he fumbled with his ticket, the way his eyes scanned the people around him. But never quite focused on anyone. It wasn't a nervousness that you would expect from someone who had never flown before, more like a weariness, as though this wasn't his first long-haul flight, or even his first long-haul day. This was just part of a much larger routine that didn't excite him anymore. Lisa, the flight attendant, had seen it all before, every kind of traveller, from the excited tourist to the weary business person. But this man was different. She couldn't put her finger on it yet, but there was something about him that unsettled her in a quiet way as she greeted passengers. She watched him slip into his seat, by the window, eyes avoiding hers, as he quietly placed his carry-on in the overhead bin. There was no smile, no acknowledgement, just a soft murmur of thanks as he lowered himself into the chair. As the plane began to taxi down the runway, Lisa's curiosity lingered. She moved down the aisle with the drink cart offering drinks to passengers. But her gaze kept flickering toward him. He had already opened a small notebook and was writing furiously, the pages filled with strange symbols, numbers, and diagrams. None of it made sense to her. And yet she couldn't look away. He wasn't reading or relaxing. He was deep in thought, scribbling, as if the world outside didn't exist. She caught herself glancing at him a few times, trying to see what kind of man could be so absorbed in his work, yet so distant from everyone else. Was he an eccentric businessman, an artist trying to work out his next big idea, or just someone who was trying to escape his reality? Lisa tried to tell herself that he was just another tired traveller, but the more she watched, the more she felt this pull of curiosity. She had worked flights for years, but there was something about him, something that made her want to know more. It was only when the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing the cruising altitude, that Lisa snapped out of her thoughts. She pushed the drink cart forward and smiled politely at the passengers, but her mind kept drifting back to him, the man who had barely spoken, and who seemed so completely out of place on a plane filled with chattering tourists and busy executives. She couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just another nobody that she could ignore without a second thought. There was something in his demeanor that spoke of a life lived on the edge of something more, something bigger than she could see in that moment. As the minutes passed, the man remained motionless, his pen never stopping, his eyes fixed on the notebook, as if the rest of the world didn't exist to him. Lisa couldn't help but glance at him more than once, wondering what he was writing, or if it was all some kind of puzzle he was trying to solve in the air. She had served drinks and snacks to passengers countless times, but with this man there was something different, something that made her want to linger just a little longer by his seat. Maybe it was the way he sat there, so completely absorbed in his thoughts, or maybe it was the quiet tension that seemed to radiate from him, as if he were waiting for something to happen. She moved down the aisle offering drinks and snacks to other passengers, but her attention kept drifting back to him. It was strange. She thought how someone could sit there so still, as if everything around him was irrelevant to whatever he was working on. It was the kind of focus that Lisa had seen in only the most dedicated people. But even those people had moments where they would look up, glance around at the world around them, take a breath. But this man didn't seem to care about anything else. Lisa tried to shake off the nagging feeling that there was something more to him. She had seen plenty of people lost in their work on flights, but never like this. It wasn't just concentration. It was something deeper, something that made her wonder if there was a reason why he was on this particular flight heading to London with a book full of cryptic notes. He didn't seem like a businessman trying to close deals, or a tourist going on an adventure. He seemed disconnected from it all, as if he didn't belong here or anywhere. As the plane hit its cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign flickered off, Lisa found herself walking past his row again, She offered a polite smile, but this time when she looked at him, she saw something different in his eyes. They weren't just tired or distracted. There was a flicker of something else, a kind of weight behind them, that made her pause for just a moment. It was like he was carrying a burden that no one else could see or understand. She hesitated for a brief second, but then moved on. Her heart beat a little faster as she caught herself wondering about him more than ever. But curiosity wasn't enough to make her act, so she went about her duties, serving drinks to the rest of the passengers as the minutes ticked by. But the feeling stayed with her, gnawing at her mind. Something wasn't right with this man, and it was starting to make her uneasy, as if she were the one who was being watched. But every time she glanced at him, he was still absorbed in his notebook, his pen moving in steady rhythm, as though he couldn't stop writing. It wasn't until much later in the flight, when the lights dimmed and the cabin grew quiet, that Lisa had a moment to herself. She walked back to the galley to refill her cart and take a quick break. But even as she moved around, she couldn't stop thinking about him. There was something about his presence that made her want to know more, something that told her that the story behind this man was far from ordinary. But it was a story that she wasn't sure she was ready to uncover yet. But curiosity, like hers, had a way of sneaking up on you, and no matter how hard she tried to push it away, she couldn't shake the feeling that this man was no ordinary passenger. He was a puzzle that needed solving, and Lisa felt an undeniable pull to uncover the truth. The cabin was quieter now, the hum of the engines filling the space. As the flight settled into its long stretch across the Atlantic, Lisa moved through the aisle again, her eyes naturally drifting back to him every time she passed his row. But this time she noticed something new. His notebook was closed and resting on his lap, and for the first time since the flight began, he was staring out the window, his face illuminated by the faint glow of the cabin, lights his eyes distant, as if he were lost in thought, staring at something far beyond the clouds. She caught herself looking at him for a little too long, but quickly turned away, not wanting to seem too obvious about her growing curiosity. Her thoughts wandered as she made her way to the back of the plane to check on the rest of the passengers. She knew she should focus on her duties, but the image of that quiet man sitting alone in his seat stayed with her. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than met the eye. It wasn't just his intensity or the way he isolated himself from the rest of the passengers. It was the way he seemed to carry a weight on his shoulders that didn't belong to a man on a simple flight across the world. As she passed by him again, she saw that his gaze was still fixed out the window, but now something else caught her attention, the way his fingers gently tapped on the armrest, as though he were counting something or perhaps working through some kind of mental calculation. She watched the rhythm for a moment, almost hypnotized by the steady tapping, wondering what he was thinking, what was going on inside that quiet mind of his. It was then that she saw the glint of something in his lap, a small device almost hidden beneath the folds of his suit. It looked like a phone, but it was different, more intricate, almost as if it had been customized. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. She had seen plenty of tech gadgets in her day, but nothing like this. It didn't belong here in the hands of a man who looked like he barely fit in with the rest of the passengers. Something was off about him, and it made her uneasy. She couldn't explain it, but she knew she was right to feel this way. The plane continued its steady flight, and Lisa moved back toward the galley, her mind racing with thoughts of the man in the seat by the window. What was he doing here? What was he hiding? Why did he seem so out of place? She had seen plenty of unusual passengers before, but this one was different. He wasn't just an eccentric traveler or a businessman wrapped up in his work. He had something more to him, a story waiting to be uncovered, but she couldn't understand what it was yet. She tried to push the thoughts away, telling herself she was imagining things, but they kept creeping back in stronger than before. Every time she walked past his row, every time she caught a glimpse of him staring out into the nothingness of the sky, her curiosity was gnawing at her, and she knew it wouldn't stop until she found out who this man really was. As the flight stretched on, and the hours passed, Lisa's mind drifted back to him again, and again she couldn't escape the feeling that this flight was about more than just a simple journey across the world. It was about to take a turn that no one could have expected. The night grew deeper, and the cabin lights dimmed further as passengers settled into their seats for the long stretch of the flight. But Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She glanced over at the man once more, and found him still staring out the window, his face now more shadowed than before, but his posture was rigid, his hands still resting on the armrest. With a strange intensity she couldn't explain, the tapping had stopped, but now he was still so still that it almost made her uneasy. It was as if he were waiting for something she couldn't see, and the tension in the air around him seemed to grow thicker with every passing minute. Lisa moved down the aisle again, this time her eyes constantly drawn to his seat. She was trying not to make it obvious, but she couldn't help herself. There was something about him, something that made her feel as though she was on the verge of discovering something huge, something that could change everything. And yet every time she tried to focus on anything else, she found herself coming back to him, to the strange, quiet man who sat alone with his thoughts, as if the rest of the world didn't matter. She tried to keep her routine, moving, serving drinks and snacks to the other passengers, but her thoughts kept returning to him, the way his eyes never left the window, as if there was something out there in the vast expanse of the sky that he could see, but no one else could. It felt like a secret, something he was guarding closely, and Lisa felt herself pulled into the mystery more than ever before. As she reached the back of the plane, she took a deep breath, trying to center herself and focus on the task at hand. But when she turned around to head back to the front of the cabin, she saw him again. His notebook was open this time, and he was writing once more, his pen moving furiously across the pages. The same strange symbols and numbers filled the pages, but there was something different about the way he was writing now. His hand was more hurried, more frantic, almost like he had to get something down before it was too late. Lisa's heart began to race. Her instincts were telling her that she needed to know what he was writing, what he was planning. But she couldn't bring herself to ask him. She had no reason to approach him, no reason to intrude on his quiet space. But she couldn't stop the thoughts from swirling in her mind. What if he was writing something important? What if the world was about to change, and no one even knew it yet? What if this man held the answers to a question no one had even thought to ask? Her hands shook slightly as she passed him again, trying to act casual, but her mind was anything but calm. Her curiosity was consuming her, and she couldn't remember the last time she had been this unsettled by a passenger. She had been a flight attendant for years, and had seen countless strange passengers, but none had made her feel this way. This man was different. There was no doubt about it. He was hiding something, and Lisa was determined to find out what it was. She moved back to the galley, trying to focus on her duties, but all she could think about was the man in the seat by the window, and the notebook he was writing in, the strange symbols, the urgency in his movements. It was like a puzzle waiting to be solved, and she knew that if she didn't find the answer soon, it might be too late. The flight had entered its second half, and the cabin was quiet, with only the occasional murmur of a passenger or the soft clinking of utensils. But Lisa couldn't focus on anything except the man by the window. Every time she passed him, now her gaze inevitably fell on him, and every time she saw that notebook in his hands, her mind raced with 1,000 questions. What was he writing? Why did he look so intent on his work? Why couldn't he just relax like the others? She had seen so many people in her years as a flight attendant, but never anyone quite like him. There was something different about him, something that made her wonder if he was more than just another traveler. As she made her way down the aisle again, she noticed that he had stopped writing. The notebook now lay closed on his lap, but his hands were still resting on it with a strange protectiveness, as if he were guarding something precious. Lisa's pulse quickened as she passed by. She had never been this interested in a passenger, before it wasn't normal for her to become so absorbed in someone's life. But something about this man made her feel like there was more to the story than what appeared on the surface. She couldn't resist anymore. She had to know more. But she wasn't sure how to approach him. She couldn't just ask him what he was doing, or why he was so absorbed in his notebook. That would seem odd, she told herself, to calm down and just do her job. But the thought of the answers he might hold gnawed at her every minute, and with every passing second, she grew more desperate to find out. Lisa took a deep breath and stepped into the galley, trying to distract herself with the mundane task of preparing drinks, but her mind was still on him, on the mystery of who he really was and what he was hiding. She knew she couldn't just let it go. This wasn't just about a curious passenger anymore. It was about something bigger, something that felt like it was unfolding right in front of her, and yet she couldn't quite see the whole picture. Then she heard a sound behind her. It was faint at first, but then it grew louder, the quiet click of a phone screen being tapped. She turned around quickly, her heart racing, only to see the man sitting in his seat again. But this time he was looking down at his phone, his fingers moving across the screen with the same urgency that had filled his writing earlier. Lisa's breath caught in her throat as she saw what he was doing. His phone wasn't just a phone, it was something else. It was a device that looked too advanced, too intricate to be something that a regular traveler would carry. It looked custom, made almost like it had been designed for something specific, for something important. Her mind raced now. She wasn't imagining things. This wasn't just a businessman or an eccentric tourist. This was someone who had a purpose, someone who had a plan. Lisa's gut told her that this wasn't just a regular flight anymore. It was something more, something she couldn't explain, but that she knew deep down she was getting closer to uncovering the truth. As she walked back to the front of the cabin, she felt a sudden chill. It wasn't for the cold air. It was for the realization that whatever was going on with this man, it was bigger than she could have ever imagined. She had to know more. But with every step she took, the question lingered in her mind. Could she handle the truth of what he was really doing on this flight? Could anyone? The hours seemed to drag on as Lisa moved through the cabin, her mind never far from the man in seat 22, as she tried to focus on the passengers and her duties. But it was impossible to ignore the nagging feeling that had taken root inside her. Something was happening, something she wasn't seeing, but could feel in her bones. The strange man in the window seat with his notebook and his unusual phone, it all felt wrong in ways she couldn't articulate. She had been in this job long enough to sense when something was out of place. But this was different. It was like a warning buried deep within her intuition, and no matter how much she tried to push it down, it wouldn't go away. As the lights in the cabin dimmed once more, and most of the passengers settled into a quiet sleep, Lisa found herself standing at the front of the plane, staring at the rows of empty seats, her thoughts racing. What was he doing? Why was he so focused on that phone, that strange device that didn't belong here? It wasn't just a phone. It was too sleek, too high-tech for a regular traveler. It was as if he had a mission, something specific that needed to be done, and Lisa couldn't shake the thought that she was watching it all unfold in front of her. She walked past his seat again as quietly as possible, but this time when she glanced at him, she saw that he wasn't looking out the window anymore. His eyes were locked on the phone screen, his fingers moving rapidly across it in a blur of motion. She leaned in closer, trying to catch a glimpse of what he was doing, but the angle was too awkward. She couldn't make out the details, but the urgency in his movements sent a chill down her spine. Then as she turned to walk away, she saw something that made her heart stop for a split second. The man's eyes flicked up from the phone and met hers. He didn't flinch or look away. Instead, his gaze was steady and piercing, as if he had known she was watching all along, as if he had been waiting for her to notice. It wasn't the look of someone who was caught. It was the look of someone who had been fully aware of her every move from the moment she first set foot on the plane. Lisa's breath caught in her throat, and for the first time since the flight began, she felt a wave of fear wash over her, not because of anything physical, but because of the realization that this man was no ordinary passenger. This wasn't just a coincidence. He wasn't just lost in his work, or in his thoughts. He was watching her too. He had known she was curious, and now she was trapped in his web, and she didn't know how to get out. She quickly moved away from his seat, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing with questions. What did this mean? Why had he looked at her like that? What did he know that she didn't? And more importantly, was she in danger? Or was she simply overthinking it? Was this all just a strange coincidence? Or was she about to uncover something much larger than herself? The next few minutes felt like an eternity as Lisa fought to calm herself. But the unease never left her. Every movement, every sound in the cabin felt amplified. Every passenger seemed like a potential witness to something unfolding that she didn't yet understand. And as the flight continued its journey across the night sky, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that she was being drawn deeper into something that was already beyond her control. The silence in the cabin felt heavier now with every step Lisa took. She kept glancing back over her shoulder, trying to convince herself that she was imagining things. But the feeling that something was wrong wouldn't go away. It gnawed at her, like a constant reminder that she was not just a flight attendant on a routine journey anymore. She was part of something much bigger than herself. But what was it, and why had she been drawn into it? She tried to shake the thoughts away and focus on the task at hand, but every movement felt too loud, every sound too sharp, as if the world around her had suddenly become too clear, too alive with meaning. She made her way down the aisle again, her eyes unwillingly flickering to seat 22. But this time when she looked, the man wasn't there. She froze mid-step, a wave of panic crashing over her. She looked around frantically and saw no sign of him. He wasn't in the aisle or in the galley, and for a brief moment her heart stopped as the realization hit her like a cold wave of fear. Where had he gone? Was he still on the plane? Was he up to something? Was he planning something now that she had caught his attention? Lisa's mind raced, her breath quickening as she moved to the front of the plane, her thoughts spinning out of control. She had to find him, had to know where he was, what he was doing. But every part of her felt paralyzed by uncertainty. She had no idea what to do next. She had no reason to search for him or confront him. But the feeling that she was being pulled into something much larger than herself was too strong to ignore. She reached the galley and glanced back through the cabin, once more her eyes scanning every seat, but still no sign of him. It was as if he had vanished completely. But just as she was about to turn away, she heard a faint sound from behind her, a soft click like the sound of a button being pressed. She whipped around so quickly, her heart leaping into her throat. And there he was, standing near the back exit of the plane, staring at her with the same piercing gaze he had given her earlier, the one that made her feel as though he was seeing straight through her into some part of her that she didn't want him to see. For a moment, neither of them moved. They just stood there, frozen in the dim light of the cabin, the tension between them palpable, as if the whole plane had become their stage. And they were the only two actors left in the world. Lisa felt her pulse pounding in her ears, her breath shallow, as she tried to figure out what to do. But the man just stood there, unmoving like a shadow, waiting for something. He didn't say a word, didn't move closer. But his eyes told her everything she needed to know. He was waiting for her to make the first move. He knew she was onto him. And now it was her turn to decide how to react. Lisa took a deep breath and forced herself to move. She couldn't back down now. She had to know more. But as she stepped closer, the man shifted ever so slightly, his hand brushing against the small bag at his side. And for a split second, Lisa's mind flashed with fear. What if he was carrying something dangerous? What if he was planning something that would change everything for all of them? She quickly looked away, trying to focus on the task at hand. But her thoughts kept racing. What if she was in over her head? What if she was about to get caught up in something she couldn't understand? The seconds ticked by, and Lisa knew that whatever happened next would change everything. She had to choose now to confront him, or to step back and pretend that she hadn't seen anything at all. But she knew she couldn't pretend any more, not after everything she had seen, not after the way his eyes had locked onto hers, and everything that had happened since the flight began. The silence between them stretched for what felt like an eternity, as Lisa stood frozen in the aisle, her heart pounding, her mind racing with 1,000 different questions. The man had shifted ever so slightly, but not enough to give away his intentions. It was as if he were testing her, waiting for her to make the next move. And for a split second, Lisa wondered if she had misjudged him all along, if maybe this was all just her imagination. But then she remembered the strange device, the notebook, the urgency in his every movement, the way he had locked eyes with her, like he had known exactly what she was thinking, and the fear that had gripped her heart since the moment she first noticed him returned tenfold. She couldn't stay frozen there forever. She knew that if she didn't act now, she would lose her chance to uncover whatever it was he was hiding, so she forced herself to take a slow step forward, her eyes never leaving his as she moved toward him. But just as she was about to say something, the man did something unexpected. He took a step back, his eyes never leaving hers. But his movements were careful, deliberate, almost as if he were trying to distance himself from her. Or was he trying to protect her from something she wasn't meant to see? Lisa's breath caught in her throat as she stopped in her tracks, a new wave of tension flooding the air. Between them, what was happening? What was he doing? Why was he pulling away? Why had he stepped toward the exit, only to retreat so suddenly? She stood there, feeling a sense of both dread and curiosity flood her chest, her instincts screaming at her to stay back, to not engage, to forget about him, and just finish the flight. But she couldn't let go. The feeling inside her had become too strong. It was like a puzzle she couldn't leave unsolved, a mystery she couldn't walk away from. The man was still standing there, but now there was something different about the way he was looking at her. It was as if he had made a decision, as if he had finally come to a conclusion about what to do with her. And before she could react, he spoke in a low, quiet voice, almost a whisper, but enough for her to hear it clearly. "You should leave me alone." He said his words slow and deliberate, but they hit her like a cold wave. "This isn't something you want to get involved in." Lisa froze, her mouth dry as his words sank in. For the first time, she felt truly afraid, but not just of him. There was something in his tone, something that made her realize she had stepped into a world she didn't belong to, a world she had no understanding of, and that terrified her more than anything else. What was he trying to protect her from? What had she stumbled onto without even realizing it? Before she could ask another question or move closer, the man turned and walked briskly toward the back of the plane, disappearing through the curtain into the crew section. As quickly as he had appeared, Lisa stood there rooted to the spot, her mind spinning, trying to piece together the fragments of everything that had just happened. Had she been wrong? Was he hiding something dangerous? Or was he just a man lost in his own world? She didn't know. But one thing was clear, her encounter with this man had changed everything. As she walked back to the galley, she felt the weight of what had just occurred settle heavily on her shoulders. She had seen something that she wasn't sure she was supposed to see. And now, as the plane continued its journey through the night, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever this man had been involved in it wasn't over, not by a long shot. She glanced at the empty seat 22, a one last time, knowing that her life would never be the same again. And as the plane descended toward London, she couldn't help but wonder if she would ever truly understand the mystery of the man in seat 22A, or if some mysteries were meant to stay unsolved.